With the consent of the group, I would like to skip to item 5 on our, nope, I'm sorry, not item 5. Where,
I'm 5.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Skip to item 5, the presentation from the city manager.
Thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity to present to you. But before I get started, I did want to introduce you to someone very special. As most of you have heard, I'm going to be retiring on October 4th, and the City Council has hired Rob Field, who is this guy sitting right behind me, over my shoulder behind me. Rob comes to us from the County of Riverside with over 20 years experience in economic development, and I'm thrilled that I will be leaving the city in good hands. Rob doesn't officially start until Monday the 21st, but he's kind of hit the ground running, just like he's here today, meeting with staff members and meeting with the council, and we're working on a smooth transition. So Rob, you want to say hello to the group?
I just want to greet everybody. I do have quite a bit of background in libraries too. One of the things I ran for the County of Riverside was the Riverside County Library System, which has 36 branches. So I have a deep and abiding love for, respect for the institution, and looking forward to being able to continue to have an association with libraries. Fantastic tools, really great for communities to have. So looking forward to meeting you all in person when we can actually finally do that. And in the meantime, I've already talked to Ed. I want to go I want to do a tour of all 4 of your libraries. So it's going to be looking forward to working with you all. So thank you.
Oh, we're sorry to be losing Terry, but welcome aboard. Look forward to working with you.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And you'll probably see Rob sneak out a little bit. He's got to go on a tour with a council member, but he's going to sit here for just a little bit while we get started on the presentation. So is everyone ready for me to pull up the PowerPoint? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate this opportunity. Again, I'm not here to speak or advocate for the tax measure. I'm here to talk to you about the city's financial position only. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. As you likely know, the city filed bankruptcy a couple years ago, and we've been working towards financial stability ever since we came out of bankruptcy, which is in 2015. What you probably don't know is what came out of the bankruptcy was what's known as the Plan of Adjustment, and this was our roadmap, if you will, going forward to continue on financial stability. So this presentation today goes back to about 2008 in some cases, but we'll bring you forward to the future, kind of where we've been and where we are and where we're moving to. As part of the Plan of Adjustment, one of those things that was modernizing the city charter, which has been done by the voters. They did that in 2016. They've also annexed out fire services to the County Fire Protection District, which reduced pension and workers' compensation on a go-forward basis. Those steps also included outsourcing several of the following services: legal, management and maintenance of our Sarco complex, landscape maintenance, integrated waste, which is refuse. And these actions have helped reduce annual operating pension obligations and workers' compensation also on a go-forward basis. The outsourcing of integrated waste also provided the city with a one-time lump sum payment of $5 million that's been used to bolster the city's general fund reserves and generates about $8 million annually in franchise revenue. The implementation of the state and city pension reform has also helped to control costs on a go-forward basis with the benefit formula reductions. Employees are now paying a portion of the city's employer costs along with the employee share. Taking just this fiscal year as an example, what those measures have saved the city, it's about $1.9 million. The city is currently on track to pay down its unfunded CalPERS liability by 2046, which sounds like a long ways off, but it's not unusual. Most cities are in our same boat. Additionally, the city has taken proactive steps to streamline operations, combining service lines to eliminate redundancies, including the consolidation of parks and public works maintenance, along with community and economic development services. This next slide is very telling, going back about 10 years and what our staffing levels have been. As you can see, at the height, we had about 1,220 employees. The city's had a decrease of 600 in full-time positions since 10 years ago. Of those, about 288 deleted positions were a result of the outsourcing that I just talked about, but 316 have been deleted due to reductions in force, which were required to decrease operational expenses due to low revenues. This includes 78 positions last fiscal year and another 27 positions in this fiscal year. I don't have to tell you, library folks, you've seen the cuts yourselves over there. The loss of these positions has had a significant impact on the city's ability to provide services in every single department. Other steps the city has taken towards financial stability include updating the master fee schedule to ensure that our costs are being recovered for services that we provide. This is expected to generate $967,000 in additional revenue this fiscal year alone. The study has not been updated in 15 years. The city will also begin to collect cannabis tax revenue this year, which is expected to net $666,000. The gross is about $1 million, but the city council set aside a third of that, or $333,000, for the enforcement of illegal activities related to cannabis, so those that are legal can be successful. We expect this source of revenue to grow to $2 million in the coming years as more of those operations are up and running. Even with all of those measures that I've just talked about, these changes, like most cities in the Inland Empire, we are experiencing limited revenue growth that has not kept pace with the rising costs of providing the services. The city faces a structural deficit of millions of dollars in the coming fiscal years. With escalating costs associated with maintaining existing service levels, there has not been sufficient funding to address the city's capital needs as well. For example, the city streets require substantial repair, with an independent engineers rating more than 80% of the city's roads in poor or very poor condition. The costs associated with getting all of the city's streets up to the established standards are estimated to be more than $210 million. And the costs associated with addressing the deferred maintenance of our facilities is estimated to be about $195 million. This next slide is very telling about our main sources of revenue, which are regular sales tax, utility users tax, and then the Measure Z sales tax. Those make up about 50% of the city's projected 2021 revenue. So sales and use tax is expected to come in at about $32 million this year. Utility users tax, $23 million, and Measure Z sales tax is about 7.9. But as you can see, going back to 2006, before Measure Z, it was actually approved by the voters then, our sales tax was almost $38 million. As it started to dip going into 2010, which is when we started getting about $8 or $9 million in Measure Z tax, that's when the economy fell. So even with those two combined, it never was at the height of what it was in 2006. So we've often been accused of wasting Measure Z or not spending it correctly, but in fact, the economy dipped and we didn't get the revenue that we anticipated getting, yet our costs went up. The other source of revenue has stayed pretty stagnant, and that's the utility user tax at about $24 million a year. As solar and other things come into play, we stop collecting as much on that. So our revenues have basically been stagnant. Other sources of revenue the city receives are a portion of our property tax. It's about 14% of our budget. When we outsourced to the county for fire, our property tax went with that. So the county now collects our property tax for that district. We also get license and permit fees. That's about $10 million of our revenue. Franchise tax, another $10 million. And then charges for service is about $6.8 million. And fines and forfeitures about $1.5 million. As you can see on the chart, the sales tax only returned to pre-recession levels in 2019, when we had a height here of about $38 million. It took 12 years to recover, and now with COVID impacts, we are losing some ground. And as I mentioned, our utility user taxes remain virtually flat since 2006. So let's talk about Measure Z. It was a little history on it. It was approved by the voters in November of 2006. It enacted a quarter-cent general sales tax for a period of 15 years. Since 2007, it has generated approximately $92 million in revenue for the community, for community services in the city. Almost immediately after the adoption of Measure Z, as I just showed you on the previous chart, the Great Recession began, leading to a 5-year period of unprecedented declines in city revenues, and thus related cuts in programs and staff. Without the revenue generated by Measure Z, the city would have experienced more significant service cuts during that time frame. This next slide shows you what will happen. It shows you the history of Measure Z revenue, going back to 2015. So as you can see, we received about $7 million in 2015, went up to about a high of about 8.5 million. Now 2018 and 19 are a little bit deceptive because we didn't receive some of the revenue we expected in 2018, so it was shown in 2019. Otherwise, it would have been consistent about $8 million. This next slide is very important. This is what shows if Measure Z were to expire in 2022, which is when it sunsets and there was no replacement of revenue. So the 10-year forecast provides a picture of the city's finances over time if it sunsets in 2022. Some assumptions we must keep in mind when reviewing the 10-year forecast include the fact that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the city was on track to receive $38 million in sales tax and a similar amount again this fiscal year. But sales tax estimates for the current fiscal year are now at $32 million, which, as we're starting to get the numbers in, we're thinking it may be a little bit better than that. We're very hopeful, but that was a decrease of $5.8 million. City is also on track to receive $9.4 million in Measure Z sales tax, and now we're estimating $7.9. We also had to use the use of one-time funds to reduce the budget deficit this fiscal year, and these strategies totaling $3 million will not be available next year. So as you can see, if Measure Z were to expire without any revenue in 2023, we would have spent down all of our general fund reserves and be in a deficit position. Obviously, you can't operate in a deficit position, so that would require more cuts for a total going out to 2027 of a loss of $93 million. If no action is taken on the that it will sunset on March 31st, 2022, and we will lose $8 to $9 million annually. This next chart shows you the history of our general fund reserves, which, as you know, it's like your savings account. It's hard to be financially healthy if you don't have a savings account. So about $15 million in 2015, we were able to build on those reserves, as I talked about previously, by some one-time money to a high of about $39 million in 2018. But as you can see, budget deficits, we're starting to deplete our general fund reserves, which is not a healthy position to be. We did anticipate during the budget time that we would end the year with only $21 million in our general fund reserves. Again, it's looking better. We won't know for a few more weeks, but it will not be what we thought it was going to be pre-COVID levels. The estimated reserve fund balance at the end of this year is less than 25% of the city's general fund expenditures. The drawdown of reserves is after significant cuts were made, along with the use of one-time funds to offset the general fund expenditures, including $11.2 million last fiscal year and another $7.4 in this fiscal year. Continued use of our reserves to balance the budget will hinder the city's ability to address unanticipated losses in revenue and operating expenditures moving forward. Additionally, the drop in reserves affects the city's ability to take advantage of the prepayment options to CalPERS. So every year we pay upfront $912,000 towards our unfunded liability. If we lose that ability, have to pay interest, it would cost us about $912 million. Continued use of reserves also limits the city's ability to obtain financing, issue bonds, and obtain other sources of discounts. So we often get asked, why not renew at the quarter-cent, the current rate that it is? Why are we going for a 1%? So this next chart shows you what the 10-year forecast looks like at a quarter. If they were to approve it, you can see that we would be into our emergency reserves by 2023-24 instead of the previous years. So we would also be like $34 million basically in the hole by 27-28. So it certainly wouldn't be enough to address some of those needs that I was talking about in a previous slide. This next slide shows you what the 10-year history looks like if the voters were to approve a 1-cent sales tax. We would receive an additional $24 to $27 million a year for a total of 32 to 36 annually, because we wouldn't lose the $9 million. and we would be able to shore up the city's reserves, pay down our debt obligations, and make needed investments in city infrastructure, streets and facilities and parks, and improve our service levels. This shows that the reserves would go up to 175 million. Obviously, we wouldn't collect those in a savings account. We would spend them on the needs that we've talked about. This next slide is very interesting. It talks about what the state's limit is on sales tax. So as you can see from the blue, the statewide base is 7.25%. There's a cap on sales tax in California. The limit, it can't be more than 9.25. Many LA County cities are at their height. We are not. We are currently at 8.25 with the SBCTA, which is our transportation authority. They get about 0.5%, and our current Measure Z sales tax is 1/4 cent. So there's a capacity there of 1.25%. If the city were to assess the maximum, it would be, for a total sales tax of 8% within the city. If it's not renewed, other taxing entities could have the opportunity to seek, so other agencies in the city could take advantage of this capacity, and the city would never have this opportunity again. We wouldn't have control of those funds locally. So it's just something to keep in mind. So what have we been doing over the last year in this regard? As I told you, the plan of adjustment did call for the renewal and increase of Measure Z in order to be financially solvent. So we've been working for the last year. We conducted opinion surveys of likely voters last August of 2019, and again at the end of May, just before the City Council made the decision to put this on the ballot in July. We asked for feedback during the course of the year by completing the community survey by mail and online. That was throughout the entire year. It was on our website. And residents were also notified of the City Council's consideration of the potential sales tax measure prior to them adopting it, and invited to provide feedback through 2 community informational mailers in January and June. The information was also incorporated into an insert which included in the January and February water bills. And throughout this time frame, residents have repeatedly communicated that the highest priorities for funding, should the voters vote this in, would be attracting and retaining local businesses and jobs, creating safer and cleaner neighborhoods, addressing homelessness, improved public safety and emergency response, and maintaining youth and violence prevention programs. They also said improving public infrastructure, including streets and city streets and parks, would be a priority. A majority of those surveys have expressed a need for added funding to provide these services, along with support for the continuation and increase of the sales tax to replace Measure Z. It is also important to note that the city's plan of adjustment called for this, as I mentioned earlier. So what about transparency and accountability? The city had established the Measure Z Oversight Committee to review and report on independent audits of the city's use of the Measure Z sales tax. And although there have been times where we've gotten behind in these audits, they are all caught up now, and the committee has been meeting to review those audits. If the voters were to enact what is now Measure S in November, renewing and increasing the city's general sales tax to 1%, the proposed measure anticipates the City Council would appoint residents to continue to serve on the Oversight Committee to ensure fiscal and county accountability and transparency. I will note that on September 23rd, as recommended by the Measure Z Oversight Committee, the City Council will be considering various fiscal policies for spending in the event Measure S passes. The Measure Z Committee will then be given the opportunity to review those policies on October 5th before final adoption on October 7th. That will be a public meeting. Public comment will be allowed. It will be posted just like a regular council meeting and held on Zoom and streamed so the public can watch. So ballot measure timing. State law requires that ballot measures be placed on general elections. So the next opportunity to place a ballot measure is this November 2020, which is why it was our focus. Should voters not approve the extension of the city's sales tax under Measure S, the next opportunity to place the matter on the ballot outside declaring a fiscal emergency would be November of 2022, which is 7 months after Measure Z sunsets. So I always like to end this kind of depressing little presentation with a little bit of good news. The city's got a lot of things. I call it the sleeping giant of opportunity. We have developers that still want to come here. We've got a lot of great projects on the horizon and opportunities. We've got Amazon Air is establishing a regional hub at the airport. Carousel Mall development agreement will be going forward soon for development of the mall, former mall property. The Fifth Street Gateway project, which is a commercial project just off of the 215 freeway. You may know where In-N-Out Burger is when you get off the freeway there, and there's a lot of former RDA vacant land. We have a developer getting ready to break ground on that anytime now. So we'll be able to have places to go to lunch and stop and get a coffee. Options for a new city hall are under consideration. And the city's general plan is also being updated. It has not been updated since 2004. And we were very fortunate, and we got $3 million from the state with the assistance of Assemblymember Ramos for that project. And as part of that, the specific plan for downtown will be done. That is actually on the council agenda for tomorrow night to award a contract to the firm who will be doing that work. And as you may or may not know, general plans take quite a few years, but there's a lot of community involvement as we do that. And then, of course, we've got the Redlands Light Rail project coming from Redlands to our transit center in downtown that's going on. You may know if you drive around San Bernardino and all the streets have been closed. But the long-term success of these projects will require the city to be in a position to make significant investments in public infrastructure, including city roads, parks, and community centers and libraries, and provide for added enforcement and safety measures, including code enforcement, police and violence intervention programs, support the community resource services through recreation programs, homeless, housing, and wraparound services, and support beautification maintenance programs like tree trimming and graffiti abatement, and support business development and retention efforts. If those developers are going to come and stay in San Bernardino, we will need resources for that. So in summary, Measure Z has been a critical source of revenue to the city, helping preserve safety services in the community, generating between $8 and $9 million annually. And without this funding, the city will have to continue to make cuts for services. With that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Terry, I have a tiny question.
Sure.
You mentioned development around the In-N-Out. Is the In-N-Out going to go away?
No, it will stay there, and it will augment those other things. That's a really important question, Dr. Clark.
Thank you. Oh,
you will have more options surrounding In-N-Out.
Oh, okay. Are there restaurants and things like that that have already expressed an interest?
Yes, there are. There's actually a drawing. It's Gian Torkin is the developer of there. He's had the agreement with the city for quite a few years. So yes, he has a plan, and he will be going to Planning Commission soon.
Ah, okay, great.
Are there any other questions I can answer?
Well, this is Val. I have a question. What are your projections on how long, should this tax pass and everything, how long before some of these projects get underway?
That's a really good question. Ask this guy behind me. It's going to be, like I said, the council's going to be deciding on some fiscal policies, because I know that's been very important to folks of how this money is going to be spent. So on September 23rd, I think if you'll listen in and if they come up with the policies and the tax goes into place, some of it would probably be right away, such as hiring additional staff. For instance, we desperately need code enforcement officers for this city. Those kinds of things could happen. Some of the longer term things would take a while, but the source of revenue would start coming in the last quarter of this fiscal year, if it were to pass.
So we'll start collecting in April, and then we would receive that first allocation in June.
So some of those things you could actually see the benefit of in this fiscal year. Carolyn, you're on mute. You're on mute.
You have to unmute yourself.
There she is.
I got it. I have a question. Since the city plan is like archaic and it won't be on board again for years after this tax is implemented, what kind of confidence can we have that this plan sort of communicates well with all the things that we're talking about in terms of accountability for the measure that we're implementing, Because it just seems a little cart before the horse for me.
Well, the general plan has to do with development and planning of the city. I get that, and it will have an impact, and that could take 2 years. But as I mentioned, there's so many other needs: streets, lights, roads, those kinds of things, public safety, code enforcement. Those things could certainly take place while the general plan is in progress.
Yeah, because I'm thinking development also includes about roads and et cetera.
That is absolutely true. So those things would have to go together.
Okay.
But like I mentioned, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, part of what council will be considering with their fiscal policies with the workshop is really outlining how they will be programming those dollars, how they will go through the budget process, and how they will involve community in that process. And one of the ways is engaging what would be the Measure S Oversight Committee in providing input in the budget process, and not just reviewing on the auditing side after the funds have been expended. So I think some of those protocols being put in place sets the stage for good long-term planning. Obviously, we don't know what revenue is going to be. I mean, you know, it's a projection on an annual basis, and so there are going to be adjustments that are made year to year, but that happens as part of that budget process. So as they work towards building the general plan, I think that pairs with the strategic planning that needs to happen, and then just connects with our annual budgeting process. So providing input in that, the establishment of those policies, I think is really important as we set the stage for what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, that's been one of the big concerns of the Measure Site Committee, is that they said we get to see it after the audits to make sure you spin it like you were supposed to. We want to be a part of the process before. So we will be bringing on the 23rd actually to augment those, what they do.
I have a question.
Sure.
My neighborhood here, we have a concern because are they also planning for our streets to be taken care of? We have lots of potholes going to the main street over by the hospital, at the Dignity Health, and the elementary school. Are they planning that also to get our streets back looking
Yeah,
nice?
as I mentioned in my presentation, we estimate we've got about $195 million in deferred maintenance on our streets. So that would be part of those fiscal policies that Rebecca was just referring to, that the council would be adopting. Is how much are they going to set aside every year towards those efforts?
Okay, thank you.
I can't talk directly about your specific pothole, but in general,
they're all over. They're all over.
Yes, they are.
I have another question. What is the plan to encourage people to vote for this? I mean, I don't think people are just going to go out and vote to increase their taxes. I mean, you can tell them what you intend to do with the money and so on. But remember, the past, when huge amounts of money were paid to people who left because they were sued, the city was sued. Okay, how now are you going to sell this to the voters to vote for it?
Well, it's really important that I tell you, I cannot sell this to the voters, especially on city time. It's against the law. All I can do is educate on our financial position. What I can tell you is that there are others out there that are politically working towards that effort, with signs and those kinds of things. But that I am not here to advocate for a tax. I'm simply here to educate on the city's financial position.
Terry, when you did that presentation for Ed and I think you mentioned that in those surveys of city residents that the library was also one of the priorities. I didn't hear you say that this time. So I'm curious where the library falls, and then also to what extent do those citizen responses guide how the priorities will be developed?
The excellent question. I don't think the library was specifically called out, but community services in general certainly will, that people want to see that, and that would include libraries, and libraries are certainly included in the facilities part of it. But the council heard loud and clear. We've given them the results of the polls. So that if you read the agenda item for the 23rd, when it posts, you'll see what, especially the Measure Z committee asked them to concentrate on in those areas. And they are a little broad, they're a little general, because like Rebecca just said, every year those needs and wants are going to change, right? Every budget year. depending on the revenues coming in.
And in the priorities established with what's called out in the revenue measure itself, it is a general tax, and libraries are mentioned in there from a maintenance and programming standpoint. And they are mentioned also in terms of priority for funding, along with our parks and community centers and the like.
Thank you. As board members, can we advocate on behalf of this measure?
Yes, as board
Yeah.
members, you can do that, and as private citizens, you can certainly do that, yes.
Do any of you have other questions for Terry or Rebecca?
Well, I really appreciate you giving us this time this afternoon, and I hope it was helpful to you.
No, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Good to see you. Congratulations on your retirement, Carolyn. All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, we will revert to our regular agenda. And Ed, do we have minutes? Don't, do we?
Yes.
Yes, minutes from March.
Okay. All right, give you, does anyone need time to review the minutes? Carolyn, you're muted again.
There was no public comment, Nicole?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
There you are.
I have one correction. For some reason, although I was absent, everywhere I'm listed is Grant Tillman.
Okay, I didn't put a comma. Let me make sure. Okay.
Sean,
That's
sharing the
just,
spotlight with Jennifer.
Yes, because you were absent that day, so you're under, you and Jennifer under absent. That's how the mayor and city council, they do theirs, with just the last names.
Oh, got it.
I move that we accept the minutes.
Is there
Second.
any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Ed, you're up.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. It's been obviously a few months, but always good to see you. And thank you to our president for his counsel and wisdom during this long and challenging time here.
What that means is that I talked to Ed a couple of times and agreed with whatever he said.
So obviously in terms of a month in review, since it's been a few months, not really that much to report there. We'll talk more about reopening plans later. And then review of library statistics. Well, obviously 6 months of basically electronic library service. One of the highlights was in May, we did come close, but not quite, to getting 1,000 circulations for the Overdrive ebooks and e-audiobooks. We were fortunate at the end of fiscal year 1920 to utilize $12,000 of funds provided to us from the state library, so that enabled us to augment the collection. And then we also took advantage with some other libraries, Beaumont, Camarillo, Moore Park, and one more, to share Overdrive collections, since these were relatively small or single unit libraries compared to somewhere like LA County that's a large consortium. They gave our patrons a chance to share in some other collections, and that people could use our collections as well. So that also helped augment the stats of Overdrive a bit. There's also supposed to hopefully be some more supplemental funding for Overdrive from the State Library, but I haven't received it yet.
Ed, is there an additional cost to us for sharing?
No, there was no additional cost to us, so
Okay.
it was a good thing. And then also another feature that we offered within Overdrive, since we were close to the public, we did a couple of things in terms of enabling people to sign up for a library card for free. One is a library card that can be used for Overdrive and various databases. Overdrive also offers a card to city residents only from directly within its Libby app, which is Overdrive's app that people would utilize on devices. But obviously, some people may just see the app only and wouldn't even look at our webpage to consider the other library cards. So that was also something that helped boost Overdrive circulation a bit, and that people were seeing the Overdrive instant digital card directly with their app, within their app. So that was something else in terms of an enhancement for Overdrive. So that's basically 6 months worth of stats in a nutshell, since we obviously haven't been open to the public. And then the next item is just the library budget for fiscal year 2021 as passed by the mayor and council in June. First time it's been included in the packet here for you, since obviously we haven't met. Any questions from the floor?
Yes, Ed,
Yes.
where my cabin is in Sonoma County, books can be checked out, but they're brought to the front doors of the facilities. Have you thought about offering a checkout service that would not open the libraries in the conventional sense?
Well, we thought about it, although we didn't pursue it for various reasons. But we do have a reopening plan on today's agenda that we will address.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciated it. And the person I met at the Sonoma County branch was a Nazi in her manner. You've got to watch what you do, but it felt good to be able to go online and check out the card catalog and then order a book. Yeah, that's all.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, then I guess we're...
Let me just say one quick thing by way of a president's report. I did meet with Barbara Fleming from Morgan Stanley, and she's made a couple of concrete recommendations. I'll pursue those. We've already gone over this in general, so I should have a report at our next meeting about where our funds will go. Okay, so that's that from me. Okay, Ed, let's go to item 6 if you're ready.
So item 6, after obviously the closure here, now we can look at a what I'm recommending as a phased reopening of library services, looking at what other libraries in the area are doing. I also participate in conference calls every couple of weeks with libraries both in San Bernardino and Riverside County and throughout the state, and also some guidelines for service from the state library.
Do you also, is the San Bernardino County Library on those calls as well?
Usually, yes. Yes, he's on
Okay.
many of those calls.
Okay.
So as you know, we've been closed since March, so it's been close to 6 months. So now what I was looking at was, as you probably noticed from the staff report, is looking at a phased reopening. Initially, I was looking at trying to reopen Feldheim on a very limited basis and then expanding out services both in Feldheim and at the branches as we can. I wanted to kind of get a feel for how it was going at Feldheim, what and questions we would encounter, what work processes and procedures staff was comfortable with. A couple things we were debating on looking initially at Feldheim would be essentially just having lobby library service where people could check out materials at the circulation desk, west side, but essentially that would be about all they could access. Or another option would be to give them some access to circulation reference and the front of Children's. If people requested a book that we needed, staff could actually physically go to the shelf, retrieve the item. Of course, people could place books on hold through the computer or call in and have us retrieve books. And they're both scenarios. I wasn't quite ready to permit the access to the public computers here at Feldheim. I think we need a bit more time in trying to get that ready because of the challenges posed. And then from there, like I said, I was looking at trying to expand service to branches. Also, as Feldheim reopens, and looking at what other libraries are doing in the area, such as the county or Redlands. They're not offering their regular service hours, but offering a more limited service hour, so a good 4 or 5 hours a day. So while Feldheim is normally open 8 hours Monday through Thursday, I was thinking of only doing 5, like 10 to 3 Monday through Thursday. Saturday, since it's 5 hours, 1 to 6, would just remain what it was, because based on what other libraries were doing in the area, most of them are looking at 4 or 5, maybe a little more hours, and not all are offering the same days of service.
Ed, can I interrupt you for a sec?
Yes, sir.
Ed and I talked a lot about the computers and access to Feldheim. As you know, we've got computers on both the first and second floors, and given our limited staffing, giving people access to the computers on the second floor seems absolutely impossible. And on the first floor, we'd have to separate people. There'd have to be social distancing. And I was concerned, and I think Ed was as well, that people would say, well, that computer is not being used, so why can't I use it? And again, we have limited staff to police that kind of thing. So it seemed to me, and I think to Ed as well, that at least for the time being, we just have to leave the interior of the library closed, but have them have access in one way or another to books. But we've had several discussions about this.
My thinking is, do we have to coordinate this plan with public health? Do we need some kind of public health approval before we?
It was my plan here was reviewed by Human Resources for the city. So they've reviewed it as far as thinking what they were comfortable with from a health and safety perspective.
Okay, so we don't have to, there's no legal requirement for us to get an approval through the public health department.
No, this was reviewed by Human Resources risk management people, so okay by them.
I'm just saying because in our world, in schools world, that those tie hand in hand, and so I'm curious as to why the public health department wouldn't be concerned that we weren't doing things in order to sacrifice safety.
Sorry, go ahead.
The other issue is I'm not so worried about the staff being able to handle themselves appropriately in this whole process. But when we throw the public into it, that gets iffy. We have a history of having some people who are very supportive citizens and responsible citizens, and then we have some citizens who can make life a little edgy. And if our doors are open, I'm sure we're going to see the same crop of individuals or the diversity in individuals at the door. And what do we have in place in terms of being able to be sure that people are operating with masks on and they're keeping their 6-foot distance and they're not abusing the restrooms for any other purpose than using restrooms? And then my last point, and then you can answer me all together.
All right.
If you, when you talked about the maintenance schedule and then the schedule for when you wanted to have the doors open, though it appeared as though there was no offering on like a Saturday. So I'm thinking, don't you have to sterilize or clean those areas every night before use? And if we don't have access through the city for that kind of maintenance, don't we to some work related for having staff do janitorial work?
Well, according to the city, like the staff counters and the staff work area, staff would be responsible for cleaning those areas. That's also part of the reason why we're looking at such restricted access into closing off most of the areas and having staff retrieve materials for them instead of having open areas. Also, tables and chairs would be removed, so there really wouldn't be areas for people just to sit and study and even to utilize Wi-Fi and charging devices like normally.
And public bathrooms or staff bathrooms, wouldn't they have to be cleaned on a regular basis?
Well, they would have their standard level of service.
Well, standard level pre-COVID or COVID level standards?
The standard level pre-COVID, because realistically that's all the city can offer.
So there's this is why I'm wondering, is public health involved? Because since COVID-19, people have had to sort of ramp up the cleaning process in order to make sure people are safe. So are we not seeing that in the city?
Well, the city manager's office said that we could open, and like I said, this plan was reviewed by HR's risk management division.
Yeah, and Carolyn, that's in part why we haven't opened yet. I share your concern about cleaning services, and the city essentially says there's no money for more of that. So for the time being, I think we will remain closed, though Ed's plan will allow for people to check books out. They just can't come into the library.
Okay. Essentially, it would be more of a transaction-based service. So just if you have a book that you put on hold, a book that you call in and want, you come in and get that book. But it's not going to be, I'm going to go in and study for 3, 4, 5 hours.
Okay. More like a curbside service inside.
Right.
Okay.
Because some libraries in the to many of the libraries in the area have put like a specific time limit, like 1 hour maximum or that. But then, of course, it's how do you realistically manage to determine who has truly been there an hour or so. But also by thinking that if we've removed tables and chairs and that's essentially accomplishing that purpose.
Yeah. So my only issue would be then the restrooms, you know, because if the doors are open and people come in and need to go to the restroom, how are we maintaining that for safety? And of course, the staff restrooms as well.
Well, I mean,
I'd encourage us to close our restrooms and only, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, that was part of the rationale in trying to limit it to a certain number of hours a day.
I mean, but, you know, I'm just saying realistically, if the doors are open and the public can come in for even just curbside service, if someone comes in and they're with a child or whatever and they need to use the restroom, you know, what will our response be? Are the restrooms closed? You know, are they locked? There's no restroom facility here. Or if we are allowing people into restrooms, how is that going to be managed so that we can keep it in an area that's sanitized?
Well, like I said, that's why a good part of it is why we're trying to limit it to 5 hours a day initially.
Well, it doesn't matter how many hours we're open. If anybody goes in there and infects the place, you know, how do we, what assurances that we have that we can keep it clean so no one is harmed or that we're considering their safety?
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to see us have the bathrooms closed and only door service and try it for a month and see how that works, what kind of response we get, and then open up gradually the restrooms and perhaps the computer terminals on a socially distanced basis.
But let's let Ed finish presenting the rest of his plan. I put us off on a tangent and I apologize.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that was a good part of the crux of the plan. I mean, you know, was just a very limited level of service initially, and then naming off things that weren't going to be, including programming that wasn't going to be included. And then, of course, we would have signage about, you know, things that we need to enforce on a temporary basis. Such as no computers, no tables and chairs, so on and so forth.
How are your other library partners handling that? The issue of cleaning?
Well, as far as staff work areas, staff is in most cases covering like public service counters and that.
So I'd be interested to see what is the county doing for the county libraries? What kind of cleaning force are they offering? For other cities, what are their cities offering for maintenance and cleaning and sanitizing? I mean, we can decide to just close, to not make them accessible, but at some point in the future, it'll be an issue we want to address, since we do know that there is transmission. There's high transmission through those areas.
Remember, we have to consider the budget. I mean, we don't have any money for anything. How are we going to clean beyond what is available?
Well, that's not, and of course, that would be our response. But if we open, we take on a certain liability to say you can use this facility if we don't also clean that facility or sanitize that facility. If it's not possible because the city doesn't have the money to do it, then we need to come to some agreement that those restrooms are not for public use.
Agreed.
Agree.
So what decision, Mr. Moderator, are we being asked to make?
Let me look at Ed's recommendation.
Okay.
And essentially, the recommendation is to give Ed the authority to implement a phased reopening of library services so that he doesn't have to come back to us for the specific details. But I think I agree with Tom and others that initially the restrooms would simply not be accessible to the public. And Ed, is that where you are in terms of phased reopening?
Well, I would have to ask, you know, is there any obligation to provide public restrooms or not? I mean, I would have to look into that possibility.
Well, we already know that the city isn't going to provide us with any additional custodial services. And that ends at 2 o'clock, is that correct?
Monday to Thursday.
Yeah. So I suppose that the restrooms could be open while there's custodial service available, but they won't be available after 2 o'clock. And I agree with Carolyn, we have some liability there. I think we have to say to people they're closed. And if we post that, people will know it. I think if we're going to reopen, it's going to be on this sort of limited basis, and we just have to hope that there will be a vaccine soon and things can begin to move back to some form of the new normal. But for the time being, my inclination is that giving people access to books, even in this limited way, is better than not giving them any access whatsoever.
Right. And that decision will be made when the county comes out of purple? Is that what we're talking about?
When the county comes out of what?
Purple.
Purple.
Oh, okay. That's the sort of threat level?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure what you were referring to. Yeah, obviously we'll follow state guidelines about when we can possibly open, but those are not mandates, those are guidelines. So the state might say it's okay to open, and Ed might decide that we're not quite ready to do that yet, and that would be perfectly appropriate.
Yes, that I agree.
So I think the motion would be to provide Ed with the authority he needs to open the library on a limited basis and to adjust hours as necessary prior to the next board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
But what can I realistically, what would you like me to realistically do to enable this? Do you only want us to try to offer a limited level of service when there are custodians on site that might only be 10 to 12 hours a week, Monday through Thursday? Or do you want us to look at just a curbside option and not allow people in? What would you realistically like me to try to do?
I thought we wanted you to allow people in, just in the foyer to pick up their materials, and the restrooms would not be open.
Well, but I don't know if we're allowing them
Oh, you don't know if that's illegal. Okay, I don't know.
to enter the doors. I don't know if we can
Okay, and
Yep,
if you
excellent.
find out, Ed, if you
Yep.
find out for whoever you need to check with on that you have to have the entire facility available back to the restrooms, or that foyer and the restrooms, then make it a curbside service. If not, then make it a foyer service.
Okay.
Okay with that?
And I can determine the days and hours that are realistic given our staffing at my
Right, and just
discretion.
make sure you're coordinating those maintenance days that the city is giving us with the times that we're open, so that we can make sure at least at the end of every day that those facilities are sanitized and cleaned before we open up again for the next round.
Carolyn, that might also happen prior to the public arriving. So it might not happen at the end of the day, but it would
Right.
always be the case that they were.
Right. However it's coordinated, we need to make sure at least we can guarantee that we clean those facilities after a heavy use day.
Yeah. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to give Ed the authority to open on a limited basis prior to the next board meeting. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, looks like that's unanimous. All right, Ed, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
We know you will.
do.
Okay, let's see, what's next? Maintenance agreement?
Yes, the annual maintenance agreement with the Library Corporation. That's the company that we pay an annual maintenance fee for technical support and support of the hardware and software to enable the program that is the backbone of what we do, from the catalog of materials to the system that enables the checkout of materials, cataloging, etc. So the cost is $34,810 for the year.
Move to approve.
Or a
I'll
second?
second.
Any discussion? Great, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved unanimously. And then finally, then a request for additional administrative leave.
As you might recall from last year, Library Director can request up to 2 days of additional admin leave for attending meetings in person or now virtually, like council meetings and budget meetings that run into the evening and outside of the standard operating hours. So that's my request to you, please, for your consideration.
A motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll just say that I'm very much in favor of this. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's approved unanimously. Ed, is there any further business?
No, I don't believe so.
All right, then call the meeting adjourned at 4:07 p.m. Thank you all very much for your attendance.
Thank you to everyone.
Yep, and stay
Nice, nice seeing you all again, even.
Everyone.
Nice.
Bye.
Jennifer.
Nice.